The dog recognized him before the men did. The wind rolled cold across the naval pier in Norfolk, carrying the scent of salt water, diesel fuel, and rain that had not yet fallen. Gray clouds pressed low over the harbor like a ceiling built from memory itself. Rows of folding chairs lined the concrete beside the destroyer USS Holbrook, where families, officers, and retired servicemen gathered beneath quiet American flags that snapped softly in the Atlantic breeze. It was supposed to be a ceremony about honor, about sacrifice, about names carved into metal that would never answer roll call again. But somewhere between the sound of distant gulls and the slow echo of a trumpet warming in the background, something unseen had already begun moving through the crowd. 8-year-old Lily Carter stood near the back beside her mother, both wrapped in dark coats against the November cold. Lily's small, gloved hand rested gently against the thick neck of a sable German shepherd sitting silently at her side. Ghost. The dog's amber eyes never stopped moving. Calm, watchful, intelligent in the way military dogs sometimes were after too many years beside soldiers. His fur carried streaks of silver now around the muzzle, and though age had softened his body slightly, there remained something disciplined in the way he held himself, like he still belonged to someone who gave commands in whispers. Lily brushed her fingers absent-mindedly through the fur behind his ears while staring toward the long line of Navy SEALs gathered near the memorial stage. 5 men in dress uniforms stood beneath the overcast sky, rigid as statues, their medals dim under the muted daylight. They looked carved from stone, older now, broader, faces sharpened by years most civilians would never understand. The tallest among them stood slightly apart from the others. Commander Ryan Vale, 42 years old, white, broad-shouldered, the kind of man whose silence filled a room before his voice ever could. His dark blonde hair was cut close in military fashion, streaked faintly with gray near the temples. A weathered scar traced along his jawline beneath the cold wind. Even standing still, he carried the unmistakable presence of someone trained to survive impossible nights. His right sleeve had shifted slightly in the breeze, exposing part of a faded tattoo along his forearm. A German shepherd's head beneath military coordinates inked in black and gray. Ghost froze. Completely. His ears rose first. Then his breathing changed. Lily noticed immediately. Ghost? She whispered softly. The dog did not respond. Across the pier, Ryan accepted a folded flag from an officer before turning toward the memorial wall beside the water. The moment he moved, Ghost stood abruptly beside Lily, every muscle in his body suddenly tense beneath his sable coat. Not aggressive, not frightened. Something else. Recognition. Deep. Instant. The leash slid through Lily's fingers as Ghost took one slow step forward. Then another. His amber eyes locked onto Ryan Vale with an intensity that made Lily's mother straighten uneasily beside her. Around them, conversation softened. The low murmur of military families faded beneath the sharp cry of a gull overhead. Ghost stopped 20 feet from Ryan. The commander noticed him then. At first, Ryan's expression remained neutral, controlled beneath years of military discipline. But when Ghost tilted his head slightly and released a low sound deep in his throat, something inside the man visibly broke. Tiny, almost invisible, a flicker behind the eyes. The kind of reaction only people carrying ghosts of their own ever showed. Ryan's breathing slowed. One of the SEALs beside him glanced over. Then another. Suddenly, all 5 men were staring at the dog. Nobody spoke. The silence spread unnaturally fast across the pier. Even Lily could feel it now. That strange heaviness adults carried when the past unexpectedly walked into the room. Ghost stepped closer. His paws moved carefully across the damp concrete until he stood directly before Ryan Vale. The old dog stared upward, unmoving. Ryan looked down at him as though seeing someone rise from the dead. Then Ghost did something that made the blood drain from the faces of every SEAL standing there. Slowly, gently, the German shepherd pressed his nose against the tattoo on Ryan's right arm. Ryan inhaled. Sharply. One of the men behind him muttered under his breath, "No way." Another looked toward the harbor, as if suddenly unable to breathe. Lily's small voice broke the silence before anyone else could speak. "Mom," she whispered, her eyes fixed on the tattoo. "Daddy had that tattoo." The words landed like thunder in still water. Every SEAL froze instantly. One man lowered his head. Another closed his eyes altogether. Ryan Vale did not move. The wind swept harder across the harbor now, rattling the flags overhead, while dark water slapped quietly against the pier below. Lily looked between the men, confused by their expressions. "My daddy had the same dog," she said softly. "And Ghost knows him." Nobody answered her. Ghost remained pressed against Ryan's arm, trembling faintly beneath the cold November air. Then the old dog released a soft whine unlike anything Lily had heard from him before. Not fear, not pain, grief. Ryan's jaw tightened hard enough to show beneath his skin. His eyes glistened for only half a second before military control buried it again. But it was too late. The others had seen it. One of the seals stepped closer, his face pale beneath the gray daylight. "Ryan," he murmured carefully. "That dog." Ryan finally spoke, though his voice sounded rougher than the Atlantic wind around them. "I know." He swallowed once before looking down at Ghost again. He belonged to Daniel Carter. The harbor seemed to lose all sound after those words. Even the gulls drifting above the destroyer fell distant beneath the sudden weight settling over the pier. Ghost remained pressed against Ryan Vale's forearm, trembling faintly beneath his sable fur, while the commander stood motionless beside the memorial wall. The dog's cloudy amber eyes never left him. Lily looked from face to face, confused by the silence spreading through the group of Navy SEALs like cold water through cracks in stone. Her mother, Emily Carter, instinctively stepped closer and rested a hand on her daughter's shoulder. She was 34 now, pale from years spent carrying grief quietly, with tired blue eyes and chestnut hair tucked beneath a wool knit cap against the Atlantic wind. She had come to the ceremony because Daniel's name was finally being added to the wall after 8 years listed only as missing in action. Closure, they had called it. But standing there now, watching 5 hardened seals stare at her dog, as if they had seen a ghost crawl from the ocean, Emily felt something inside her begin to unravel. Ryan slowly crouched before Ghost. His movements were careful, almost uncertain, like a man approaching a memory too painful to touch. The leather of his gloves creaked softly in the cold. "Easy boy," he whispered. Ghost responded instantly. His ears lowered. Then the old German shepherd leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against Ryan's chest. One of the seals behind them exhaled shakily beneath his breath. "He remembers you," another muttered quietly. Ryan did not answer. His jaw remained tight, while his hand hovered over Ghost's neck for several long seconds before finally settling into the thick fur. The moment contact happened, the dog released a low sound deep in his chest. Not a bark, not fear, relief, pure and aching. Emily stared in disbelief. "That is impossible," she whispered. Ryan finally looked up at her. His eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who had not slept peacefully in years. "Ghost was assigned to Daniel during the Kandahar operation," he said quietly. "Your husband trained with him for almost 3 years. Lily blinked. "Daddy had him before us." Ryan nodded once. Ghost slept outside his bunk every night. The wind shifted harder through the harbor then, carrying the sharp smell of rain and salt against the rows of memorial flags. Somewhere behind the crowd, the trumpet finally began its slow, mournful notes, but nobody near the SEAL team moved toward the ceremony now. Their attention remained fixed entirely on Ghost and the Carter family. One of the older SEALs stepped forward carefully. Senior Chief Marcus Holloway, mid-40s, thick gray beginning to spread through his beard. He had the heavy posture of someone carrying old guilt and silence for too long. "Ryan," he said under his breath, "we should not do this here." Ryan stood slowly beside the dog. The dog already did. Marcus looked toward Emily, then toward Lily, and something painful flickered across his face before disappearing again behind military control. Emily crossed her arms tightly against the cold. "Someone needs to explain why my daughter's dog recognizes men he has never met." Nobody answered immediately. That silence told her more than words could have. Ghost finally stepped away from Ryan and moved directly toward Marcus Holloway instead. The old SEAL stiffened instantly. Ghost sniffed his hand once before turning away, as if dismissing him. Ryan noticed it too. His expression darkened slightly. "He knows," Ryan murmured. Marcus looked away toward the water. The waves beneath the pier slapped rhythmically against the support beams below, hollow and distant beneath the gathering storm clouds overhead. Lily knelt beside Ghost and wrapped her small arms around his neck. "Daddy used to say Ghost could tell when people lied," she whispered softly. That sentence hit the group harder than Emily expected. One seal removed his cap and rubbed a hand across his forehead. Another stared out at the destroyer in complete silence. Ryan finally spoke again, quieter this time. Daniel used to joke that ghosts trusted dogs more than men. Lily smiled faintly at that. Daddy said that too. Ryan closed his eyes for half a second, just enough for the pain to show through. Emily noticed it immediately. Whatever happened overseas had not stayed overseas. It lived inside every man standing here. She stepped closer. Commander Vale, she said carefully. My husband disappeared 8 years ago. The Navy told us there was nothing left to recover. No remains. No final report that made sense. And now my dog sees your tattoo and acts like he found someone he lost. Her voice trembled slightly despite herself. Tell me what happened over there. Rain began falling lightly across the harbor before Ryan could answer. Tiny cold drops tapped against concrete, uniforms, and memorial flags. Ghost tilted his head upward toward the darkening sky, but stayed close to Ryan's side now. The commander looked toward the wall where Daniel Carter's freshly engraved name glistened beneath the rainwater. Then his eyes dropped, toward the old German shepherd beside him. There are things about that mission, Ryan said slowly, that never made it into the official report. Marcus immediately shook his head. Ryan. Enough, Ryan cut in quietly. Not angry, just tired, deeply tired. The kind that settles into a man after carrying the same memory for nearly a decade. Lightning flickered somewhere far beyond the harbor clouds. The crowd near the ceremony slowly began moving toward covered tents, while officers hurried families away from the incoming storm. But none of the Carter family moved. Ghost suddenly turned away from Ryan and began pulling gently toward a nearby equipment case resting beside the memorial stage. His leash tightened in Lily's hand. Ghost? She whispered. The dog pawed once at the dark green military case. Then again, harder this time. Ryan's face changed instantly the moment he saw it. So did Marcus Holloway's. Emily noticed both reactions immediately. What is it? She asked. Ghost let out another soft whine and scratched harder against the metal latch. Rain rolled steadily down his fur now, while thunder rumbled low across the Atlantic horizon. Ryan stepped forward slowly, staring at the case as though it contained something alive. That cannot be possible, Marcus muttered under his breath. Ryan crouched carefully beside the case while Ghost sat beside him, perfectly still again, waiting. The commander's fingers hesitated over the latch, then finally opened it. Inside, beneath a folded Navy blanket and sealed memorial documents, rested an old combat vest wrapped in clear protective plastic. Weathered, dust-stained, forgotten by everyone except the dog staring at it now. Attached to the front strap hung half of a scorched military dog tag. Daniel Carter. The rain deepened over Norfolk Harbor, turning the concrete pier slick beneath the glow of dim memorial lights. Water rolled slowly across the clear plastic covering the old combat vest, while Ghost sat unmoving beside the opened case, his amber eyes fixed on the scorched dog tag hanging from the front strap. The metal trembled faintly in the Atlantic wind. Emily Carter stared at the name etched into the worn surface, as though her mind could not fully accept what her eyes were seeing. Daniel Carter, her husband's name. Her breath caught somewhere between disbelief and grief. Why would this be here? She whispered. Ryan Vale remained crouched beside the case, rain dripping from the edge of his jawline and soaking through the shoulders of his dark uniform coat. For several long seconds he did not answer. His gaze remained fixed entirely on the vest, like a man staring at a grave that had suddenly opened. Marcus Holloway stepped closer, lowering his voice sharply. Ryan, close the case. But Ghost reacted instantly. A low growl vibrated deep through the old German shepherd's chest the moment Marcus reached forward. It was not aggressive. It was warning. Protective. The kind military dogs gave when guarding something sacred. Marcus stopped immediately. Lily tightened her arms around Ghost's neck. He does not want anyone touching it, she whispered softly. Ryan looked toward the dog. No, he murmured. He does not. The rain carried the scent of salt and wet steel across the harbor while the last groups of attendees disappeared beneath nearby tents. The memorial ceremony had almost completely dissolved now into distant voices and scattered footsteps, leaving only the Carter family and the 5 seals standing beneath the storm-dark sky beside the water. Somewhere far out in the harbor, a foghorn groaned low and mournful through the rain. Emily slowly knelt beside the open case. Her fingers trembled slightly as she stared at the combat vest sealed beneath the plastic. Daniel wore this? Ryan nodded once. Last mission. His voice sounded hollow now, drained by memory. Emily looked up at him carefully. Then why did they send me home an empty coffin? No one answered immediately. That silence hurt more than words ever could. Ghost lowered himself gently beside the case, resting one paw against the edge as if guarding it from the world. Lily brushed rainwater from her face and looked toward Ryan with the simple honesty only children still carried. Did my daddy know Ghost came home? Ryan swallowed once before answering. Yes. The word barely escaped him. Lily's eyes softened. Slightly. Good. Ryan looked away toward the restless Atlantic water beyond the pier. The rain streaked down the memorial wall now, blurring engraved names beneath thin rivers of silver. Your father loved that dog, he said quietly. Said Ghost could hear sadness before people spoke it. Emily closed her eyes for a moment at the sound of Daniel's memory spoken aloud by another man. It had been years since anyone talked about him like he was real, instead of lost paperwork inside military archives. You were there with him? She asked. Ryan nodded again. Every step. Marcus shifted uneasily beside them. Commander. Ryan ignored him. Ghost suddenly leaned closer to the combat vest and inhaled deeply against the plastic wrapping. Then the old dog released a soft cry unlike anything Emily had heard from him before. Not loud, not dramatic, just broken. Pure heartbreak carried quietly through the rain. Lily immediately wrapped her arms tighter around him. It is okay, she whispered. I am here. One of the younger seals standing farther back wiped rain from his face and muttered quietly under his breath. I cannot believe he still remembers. Ryan heard him. Dogs do not bury things the way men do. Lightning flickered silently behind thick clouds offshore, briefly illuminating the destroyer looming over the harbor like a sleeping giant. Emily stared at Ryan carefully now. The pieces no longer fit together cleanly. Not the dog, not the hidden vest, not the expressions on the faces around her. You said there were things missing from the official report, she said. What things? Ryan's jaw tightened again. Marcus immediately stepped closer. Emily, he said gently. Some missions are classified for reasons bigger than all of us. She stood abruptly, anger finally breaking through years of quiet grief. Do not do that. Marcus froze. Rain dripped steadily from the brim of his cap, while Emily's voice shook. Do not stand there and tell me my husband vanished for reasons I cannot understand while my daughter spent 8 years asking why her father never came home. Lily looked up silently toward her mother while Ghost slowly rose beside her. Ryan finally stood as well. His face looked older now beneath the storm, tired in ways sleep could never repair. Daniel volunteered for a recovery operation near the Afghan border, he said quietly. A village had been evacuated after flooding cut off supply routes in the mountains. We were supposed to extract civilians and leave before nightfall. Emily listened without moving. Ryan continued slowly. Ghost was with Daniel the entire operation. They were inseparable. Ghost's ears lifted faintly at the sound of Daniel's name. Ryan glanced toward the old dog again before continuing. A sandstorm rolled through the valley faster than predicted. Communications went down. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. His voice became quieter with every sentence now. The evacuation convoy separated. Marcus looked toward the harbor, unable to meet Emily's eyes anymore. Ryan inhaled slowly through his nose. Daniel stayed behind to guide civilians toward the ridge trail while the rest of us regrouped near extraction. Emily whispered carefully, and Ryan looked at the combat vest inside the case. And he never reached the rendezvous point. The words disappeared into the rain between them. Ghost lowered his head. Lily's small fingers tightened in the thick fur around his neck. But Ghost came back, she whispered softly. Ryan nodded once. 3 days later. Emily stared at him. Alone. Ryan's silence answered before his mouth ever could. The rain fell harder now against the pier, heavy enough to blur the harbor lights into soft golden streaks across the dark water. Ghost suddenly turned his head sharply toward Ryan again and stepped closer until he stood directly against the commander's side. Then, slowly, the old German shepherd nudged Ryan's hand with his nose. Not accusation, not fear, forgiveness. Ryan's composure cracked for the first time since the ceremony began. His eyes shut tightly as emotion passed across his face like a wound reopening beneath the rain. He waited beside the helicopter every night for 2 weeks, Ryan whispered hoarsely. Every single night. Emily's breath trembled. For Daniel. Ryan opened his eyes again, glistening beneath the storm-dark sky. No, he said, quietly. For me. The storm settled fully over Norfolk Harbor after that confession, wrapping the pier in sheets of cold rain and distant thunder that rolled across the Atlantic like artillery too far away to fear, but too close to ignore. Nobody moved for several long seconds. Ghost remained pressed quietly against Ryan Vale's leg, his old body trembling faintly beneath the weather while water streamed from his sable coat onto the concrete below. Lily looked up at the commander with wide, uncertain eyes. Why was Ghost waiting for you? She asked softly. Ryan stared out toward the black water beyond the destroyer before answering. Because I made him a promise. His voice barely carried above the rain. Emily folded her arms tighter across herself, not from cold anymore, but from the strange ache beginning to spread through her chest. What promise? Ryan hesitated. The silence that followed felt heavy enough to bend the air itself. Marcus Holloway looked exhausted now, like a man watching old doors finally break open after years spent holding them shut. One of the younger SEALs quietly stepped farther beneath the tent overhang nearby, unable to keep listening, but unable to leave either. Ryan finally knelt again beside the open case. His fingers brushed lightly across the weathered combat vest beneath the plastic. The night before the operation, he said quietly, Daniel could not sleep. Lightning flickered pale across the harbor behind him. Ghost lifted his ears slightly at the sound of Daniel's name again. Ryan continued slowly. We were stationed in a mountain outpost outside Kandahar. Coldest place I had ever seen. Wind came through the cracks in those old concrete walls like it wanted inside your bones. His eyes grew distant now, pulled backward through memory. Most nights the generators failed after midnight. The whole camp would go dark except for one floodlight near the kennels. Lily listened carefully while resting both hands against Ghost's neck. Daddy liked the dark, she whispered suddenly. Emily looked down in surprise. How do you remember that? Lily shrugged softly. He told me once before he left. Ryan's expression shifted faintly at those words. Yeah, he murmured. He did. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the opened equipment case, while Ryan's voice lowered further, almost becoming part of the storm itself. That night, I found Daniel sitting outside the kennel with Ghost asleep beside him. Temperature was maybe 30 degrees. Snow starting to come down over the ridge. He paused briefly. He had a flashlight in one hand and a letter in the other. Emily's breath caught slightly. A letter? Ryan nodded once. For Lily. Emily stared at him. I never got one. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. I know. Ghost suddenly shifted closer beside Ryan again, pressing against him as though sensing the memory itself. The commander gently rested one hand against the old dog's shoulder. Daniel kept talking about coming home. Ryan continued quietly. Not about medals. Not about promotions. Just home. His mouth tightened faintly. He showed me a photo of Lily sleeping on the couch with Ghost curled beside her. Said it was the only picture he carried that made the war disappear for a minute. Emily covered her mouth slowly with one trembling hand. She remembered that photograph. Lily had been barely 6 months old then. Ghost still young enough to climb halfway onto the couch beside her. Ryan inhaled deeply through his nose before continuing. I asked him why he trusted Ghost so much. A faint sad smile touched Ryan's face for the first time all evening. Daniel said dogs know when someone is carrying pain too heavy to speak out loud. Marcus lowered his eyes toward the wet concrete. He had heard this story before. Maybe too many times. Then Daniel looked at me and said something I never forgot. Ryan glanced down at Ghost beside him. He said, if anything ever happens to me, Ghost will know before the military does. The rain softened slightly then, falling steadier now against the harbor instead of violent. Somewhere nearby, the American flag above the memorial snapped sharply in the wind before settling again. Emily stared silently at the combat vest in the case. What happened after the convoy separated? Ryan's face hardened slightly at the question. Not anger. Memory. We searched for 2 days. His voice became rough again. Every ridge. Every abandoned structure. Every supply trail through the valley. Ghost's ears lowered as if the dog himself remembered pieces of it. Then a local rescue team found Ghost sitting alone near the extraction point. Lily frowned softly. Alone? Ryan nodded. Covered in dust. Exhausted, but alive. Emily whispered carefully. And Daniel? Ryan looked away toward the dark ocean again. Gone. The word fell quietly between them. Hollow. Empty. Ghost suddenly stood and walked slowly toward the memorial wall through the rain. Lily followed immediately beside him while the others watched in silence. The old German shepherd stopped directly beneath Daniel Carter's engraved name. Then, carefully, almost reverently, he sat down facing the wall. Emily's eyes filled instantly at the sight. Oh my God, she whispered. Ryan swallowed hard beside the equipment case. He used to sit outside Daniel's bunk exactly like that. Nobody spoke after that. The storm itself seemed quieter now around the pier, as though the harbor had lowered its own voice out of respect. Lily slowly sat beside Ghost beneath the memorial wall and rested her small shoulder gently against his wet fur. He remembers him, she whispered. Ryan nodded once from several feet away. Every day. Emily turned slowly toward the commander again. You said you made Ghost a promise. Ryan's jaw tightened immediately. For a moment, Emily thought he might refuse to answer. But then he reached into the inside pocket of his rain-soaked uniform coat and removed something small wrapped carefully in cloth. Even Marcus Holloway looked startled. Ryan unfolded the fabric slowly beneath the dim harbor lights. Inside rested a faded silver house key attached to an old leather tag scratched nearly smooth with age. Emily's breath stopped. She recognized it instantly. That was Daniel's. Ryan nodded quietly. He gave it to me the night before the mission. Emily stared at him in disbelief. Why? Rainwater dripped steadily from Ryan's hair, while Ghost remained sitting faithfully beneath Daniel's name beside Lily. The commander looked toward them both before answering. Because he said if he did not make it home, Ryan whispered. Ghost would. The rain finally began to ease after Ryan Vale's words settled across the harbor, but the cold remained sharp enough to sting through soaked clothing and trembling memory alike. Emily Carter stood frozen beside the memorial wall, while the silver house key rested quietly in Ryan's palm beneath the dim pier lights. For 8 years, she had carried questions heavy enough to hollow a person out from the inside. Now answers were appearing one piece at a time, but instead of bringing peace, they only deepened the ache growing in her chest. Ghost remained seated beneath Daniel Carter's engraved name beside Lily, perfectly still except for the slow rise and fall of his breathing. The old German shepherd looked exhausted now, as though memory itself had weight. Lily gently rubbed behind his ears the way her father used to. Daddy trusted him more than anybody, she whispered softly. Ryan looked toward the dog. We all did. Marcus Holloway exhaled heavily and stepped closer to the edge of the pier, rainwater dripping from the brim of his cap onto the concrete below. This should have stayed buried, he muttered quietly. Ryan's eyes hardened slightly. Maybe that is the problem. Marcus turned sharply toward him. You think reopening this helps her? He motioned toward Emily and Lily. You think dragging old ghosts into the light fixes anything? Ghost lifted his head instantly at the word ghosts, ears twitching beneath the harbor wind. Ryan noticed it immediately. Careful, he said quietly. He still listens. Marcus fell silent after that. The younger seals standing nearby exchanged uneasy looks, but said nothing. Emily slowly stepped toward Ryan, her eyes fixed on the old house key still resting in his hand. Why did Daniel think he would not come home? She asked softly. Ryan stared at the key for a long moment before answering. Because soldiers know things before families do. The Atlantic wind shifted again, carrying the distant smell of rain-soaked wood and engine fuel across the harbor. Somewhere farther down the pier, workers were lowering flags before the storm worsened overnight. Their voices echoed faintly against steel and water, small and distant compared to the silence wrapped around the memorial wall now. Ryan carefully closed his hand around the key. The night before the mission, Daniel sat outside the kennel for almost 2 hours with Ghost lying beside him. His voice lowered into memory again. He kept saying he had a strange feeling. Emily folded her arms tighter against herself. Daniel always trusted feelings too much. Ryan gave the faintest nod. That probably saved my life more than once. Lily looked up. Did Daddy ever get scared? The question lingered quietly in the rain-heavy air. Ryan's expression softened for the first time that evening. Every good soldier gets scared, he said. The brave ones just stay anyway. Lily considered that carefully while Ghost rested his head gently against her shoulder. Daddy stayed. Ryan swallowed once. Yeah. His voice almost broke beneath the word. He stayed. Emily watched the commander closely now. Every sentence carried something deeper beneath it. Something unfinished. You are still not telling me everything, she whispered. Ryan looked away immediately. Marcus closed his eyes briefly as though he already knew what came next. The harbor lights reflected faintly across puddles gathering near the memorial wall, while thunder rolled far out across the ocean. Ghost suddenly stood again. Slowly, deliberately. His movements immediately drew everyone's attention. The old German shepherd walked away from Daniel's engraved name and returned toward the opened equipment case near Ryan. Then he lowered his nose against the weathered combat vest sealed beneath the plastic. He sniffed once, twice, then pawed gently near one of the side pouches. Ryan froze. Marcus stared hard at the dog. No, he whispered under his breath. Ghost pawed the pouch again, harder this time. Lily followed carefully behind him. He wants something, she said quietly. Ryan crouched beside the vest while rainwater dripped steadily from his sleeves. His fingers hesitated over the pouch zipper before slowly opening it. Inside rested a small waterproof notebook wrapped in faded black tape. Marcus immediately stepped forward. Ryan. But Ryan had already removed it. The notebook looked worn, nearly white along the edges from years sealed inside the vest. Water droplets slid across its surface beneath the harbor lights. Emily stared at it in disbelief. What is that? Ryan's jaw tightened. Daniel's field journal. Emily looked stunned. You kept this all these years? Ryan shook his head slowly. No, he looked toward Ghost. He did. Nobody spoke after that. Even Marcus Holloway seemed unable to find words now. Ghost sat beside Ryan quietly, watching the notebook with intense focus as though he already knew what waited inside. Ryan carefully peeled back the old black tape, holding it shut. His fingers trembled slightly for the first time all evening. The pages inside smelled faintly of dust, rain, and old paper sealed too long away from sunlight. Most of the writing had faded badly over the years, but several pages remained legible beneath Daniel Carter's sharp military handwriting. Emily stepped closer unconsciously. Ryan flipped slowly through the journal beneath the dim light, until Ghost suddenly nudged one page with his nose. Ryan stopped instantly. A folded photograph rested between the pages. Water-stained but intact. Ryan carefully unfolded it. Emily gasped softly the moment she saw it. The photograph showed Daniel sitting cross-legged beside Ghost outside a military tent somewhere deep in the Afghan mountains. Snow covered the ground behind them. Daniel's arm rested around the dog's neck, while both stared toward the camera with matching tired eyes. On the back, written in black ink, were 6 words. If Ghost returns home first, wait. Emily covered her mouth immediately. Tears filled her eyes faster than she could stop them. Daniel wrote that. Ryan nodded silently. Lily looked up at her mother in confusion. Wait for what? Nobody answered her right away. Because suddenly every man standing there understood the same terrifying possibility at once. Ghost had returned home 8 years ago, but maybe Daniel Carter never stopped trying to. The words written behind the photograph seemed to drain the warmth from the harbor air itself. If Ghost returns home first, wait. Rainwater slid quietly down the memorial wall while nobody on the pier could find a single thing to say. Emily Carter stood frozen beside Ryan Vale, staring at Daniel's handwriting like it had reached through 8 lost years to touch her shoulder in the dark. Lily looked between the adults with growing confusion. What does it mean? She whispered softly. Ghost remained seated beside the open journal, his amber eyes fixed on the photograph resting in Ryan's trembling hands. The old German shepherd looked strangely calm now, like a dog who had spent years carrying something too heavy for human language. Marcus Holloway rubbed both hands slowly across his face beneath the fading rain. Ryan, he muttered quietly, do not do this. Ryan did not even look at him. His eyes remained locked on Daniel's handwriting. I already did, he answered softly. The wind coming off the Atlantic had turned colder now, sharp enough to cut through wet uniforms and soaked jackets alike. Harbor lights reflected across puddles scattered around the memorial wall, while the destroyer loomed silently beside them beneath the storm-dark sky. Emily carefully took the photograph from Ryan's hand. Her fingers shook visibly as she traced the faded image of Daniel sitting beside Ghost in the Afghan snow. He knew something, she whispered. Ryan nodded once. Daniel trusted instincts more than intelligence reports. Marcus lowered his voice sharply. And instincts got him stranded behind enemy lines. The moment those words left his mouth, Ghost stood abruptly. A low growl rolled through the old dog's chest. Marcus immediately stopped speaking. Lily tightened her hold on Ghost's collar gently. He does not like when people talk about Daddy like that. Marcus stared at the dog for several long seconds before quietly looking away. Shame moved across his face like a shadow passing through fog. Ryan slowly rose to his feet beside the open case. Daniel did not get stranded, he said quietly. He stayed behind on purpose. Emily looked up immediately. What? Ryan inhaled slowly before answering. The evacuation convoy was overloaded. Too many civilians. Too much damaged equipment. We were losing daylight. Fast. His voice carried the dull weight of memory now. The mountain roads had started collapsing from the storm. Emily's chest tightened. So Daniel stayed? Ryan nodded once. Someone had to guide the last transport trucks through the northern ridge. Marcus looked toward the harbor again. And someone had to keep the extraction route open. Ryan's jaw hardened faintly. Daniel volunteered before anybody else could. Ghost slowly sat back down beside Lily while the rain softened into mist around them. Emily looked down at the photograph again, tears gathering silently in her eyes. He told me he would only be gone 3 weeks, she whispered. Ryan's expression broke slightly at that. He believed it. The Atlantic fog drifted lower across the water now, wrapping the harbor in pale gray silence. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rang faintly from one of the docked ships before fading into the storm. Ryan carefully reached back into the journal and turned several more weathered pages beneath the dim pier light. Most of the ink had faded into blurred lines from years sealed inside the vest, but Ghost suddenly nudged one page sharply with his nose. Ryan stopped instantly. Folded carefully between the pages rested another piece of paper, smaller this time, torn unevenly along the edge. Marcus immediately stepped forward. Ryan. But Ryan was already unfolding it. Emily held her breath without realizing it. The paper contained only a few lines written in Daniel Carter's handwriting. Quick, uneven, like something written under pressure. If Ghost finds Lily before I do, tell her I heard her voice the night the storm came. Emily's knees nearly gave out beneath her. Ryan caught her arm instinctively before she could stumble against the memorial wall. Easy, he murmured softly. Tears rolled freely down Emily's face now, mixing with rainwater beneath the harbor lights. He heard her, she whispered. How? Ryan looked at the paper carefully. Satellite calls sometimes cut through during weather interference. That night, before communications failed, his voice lowered. Daniel listened to a voicemail from home. Emily covered her mouth tightly. She remembered leaving. That message. Lily had been crying because Daniel missed her birthday party. Emily had recorded Lily singing softly into the phone before bedtime. Daddy. Lily had whispered into the voicemail years ago. Ghost misses you. Emily closed her eyes hard against the memory. Ghost slowly walked toward her then and pressed his wet nose gently against her trembling hand. Ryan looked away briefly, unable to watch her grief directly anymore. He replayed that message every night, he admitted quietly. Marcus exhaled heavily beside them. Ryan. She deserves the truth. Marcus shook his head slowly. You do not even know the full truth. That sentence changed something instantly. Emily looked up sharply. What does that mean? Marcus stayed silent. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly toward him. Marcus. The older SEAL rubbed rainwater from the back of his neck before finally speaking. We never found Daniel's body. Emily stared at him. You already told me that. Marcus nodded slowly. But that is not the part they buried. The wind snapped violently against the memorial flags overhead while thunder rolled deeper across the Atlantic. Ghost suddenly turned his head toward Marcus with complete focus, ears raised sharply beneath the mist. Marcus looked directly at the old dog before continuing. 3 weeks after the mission, a border informant reported seeing an American soldier alive near the eastern mountain villages. Emily's entire body stiffened. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. Marcus. But the older SEAL kept going. No identification. No confirmation. Just rumors. His voice sounded rough now. The report disappeared before command ever logged it officially. Emily's heartbeat hammered visibly in her throat. Alive, she whispered. Marcus looked at her with exhausted regret. Ryan wanted to go back. Ryan finally looked away toward the dark ocean again. I begged them. The words barely escaped him. Lily looked between them all, frightened now by the weight in every adult voice surrounding her. Ghost moved instantly to her side and pressed against her protectively. Emily stared at Ryan through tears and rain alike. You thought my husband survived. Ryan swallowed hard. Before answering, I never stopped thinking it. The fog drifting across Norfolk Harbor thickened after Marcus Holloway's confession, swallowing parts of the pier beneath pale gray mist while the ocean beyond turned almost invisible beneath the storm-dark night. Nobody moved. Emily Carter stared at Ryan Vale as though the world beneath her feet had suddenly shifted into something unfamiliar and impossible. For 8 years she had buried a husband she never truly saw buried. 8 years of folded flags, military condolences, sleepless nights, and birthdays spent explaining absence to a little girl who still looked toward the door whenever storms rolled through the house. And now one sentence had shattered everything. I never stopped thinking it. Ryan stood motionless beside the memorial wall after speaking those words. Rain clung to his uniform collar and traced slowly down the scar along his jawline, while Ghost remained close to Lily, watching every movement with intense amber eyes that seemed older than the harbor itself. Marcus exhaled heavily and looked away toward the black Atlantic water. There was never enough evidence, he muttered quietly. Emily turned sharply toward him. But there was some. Marcus hesitated. The silence stretched long enough for thunder to roll across the distant horizon again. Finally, he nodded once. A radio transmission. Ryan closed his eyes briefly. Like hearing the memory spoken aloud physically hurt him. Emily's breath caught hard in her throat. You heard him? Marcus answered quietly. Ryan did. The harbor seemed to disappear around them after that. The sound of waves beneath the pier. The rain against steel. The distant groan of ships. All of it faded beneath the terrible fragile hope suddenly blooming where grief had once lived. Emily slowly turned back toward Ryan. You heard Daniel alive? Ryan's jaw tightened visibly. For several seconds he could not answer. Ghost stepped away from Lily then and moved slowly toward him instead. The old German shepherd stopped directly beside Ryan's leg and leaned gently against him, steadying him the way dogs often steadied broken people without being asked. Ryan finally looked down at Ghost before speaking. 3 nights after the convoy evacuation, he said quietly, we intercepted a weak emergency signal near the eastern ridge. His voice sounded distant now, pulled backward through memory and regret. Most of the transmission was static. Wind interference. Broken connection. Emily could barely breathe. But you heard him. Ryan nodded once. For 6 seconds. Tears welled instantly in Emily's eyes. Ryan continued carefully, each word carrying visible weight. He identified himself, gave partial coordinates, said civilians were safe. His throat tightened. Then the signal cut. Lily looked up softly from beside the memorial wall. Did Daddy sound scared? Ryan stared out into the fog-covered harbor before answering. No, his voice cracked slightly beneath the word. He sounded tired. Ghost lowered his head slowly at that. Emily pressed one trembling hand against her chest. Why did nobody tell me? Marcus answered before Ryan could. Command believed the signal was compromised. Emily looked at him in disbelief. Compromised? Marcus rubbed rainwater from his face. The region was unstable. Intelligence teams warned the transmission could have been manipulated. Emily's eyes narrowed through tears. So instead of searching for my husband, they buried him on paper. Nobody answered her, because the truth already sat heavily enough between them all. Ryan finally spoke again. I requested authorization to return. His voice remained low and rough beneath the harbor wind. Twice. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Both requests were denied. Ryan looked toward the memorial wall, where Daniel's name glistened beneath rainwater and dim light. They told me there were no recoverable assets remaining in the area. Emily whispered bitterly, recoverable assets. Ryan's face hardened faintly with shame. That phrase haunted me too. Ghost suddenly turned sharply toward the open journal still resting beside the equipment case. His ears rose instantly. The old dog stepped toward it with sudden urgency and nudged the pages again with his nose. Ryan frowned slightly. What is it, boy? Ghost pawed hard against the journal. Once. Twice. Then he stopped. At a folded section near the back pages. Lily hurried closer. He found something else. Ryan carefully knelt beside the journal while the others gathered near him beneath the drifting mist. The pages near the back were badly water-damaged, edges curling from years trapped inside the sealed combat vest. But wedged tightly within the final pages rested a thin object wrapped carefully in faded cloth. Ryan slowly pulled it free. Marcus inhaled sharply the moment he saw it. A military GPS locator beacon. Old. Scratched. Battery long dead. Emily stared at it in confusion. What is that? Ryan turned the device over slowly in his hand, rainwater dripping from his knuckles. Daniel's emergency locator. Marcus immediately shook his head. That should not exist. Ryan looked up sharply. What? Marcus pointed toward the device. The recovery report said his beacon was destroyed during the storm. Silence crashed over the group again. Ghost stared fixedly at Marcus now, unmoving. Ryan's expression darkened. Who filed that report? Marcus hesitated too long. Emily noticed instantly. Marcus. The older SEAL looked exhausted suddenly. Older than before. Like carrying this truth for years had finally hollowed him out completely. Lieutenant Grant Mercer, he answered quietly. Ryan stood abruptly at the sound of the name. Mercer. Marcus nodded once. He coordinated the post-operation intelligence review. Ryan's eyes sharpened immediately with something colder now. Focus. Mercer never entered the valley. Marcus lowered his gaze. No. Emily looked between them both. Who is he? Ryan stared at the dead locator beacon in his hand, while harbor fog curled slowly around the memorial wall behind him. The man who signed Daniel Carter's death certificate. Thunder rolled deeper now across the Atlantic. Ghost stepped closer beside Ryan again and stared at the locator beacon with complete attention. Then the old German shepherd did something that made every SEAL on the pier freeze once more. Slowly, deliberately, Ghost lifted his paw and pressed it directly against the back of the beacon where years of scratches had nearly hidden one final engraving beneath the metal surface. Ryan wiped rainwater carefully away with his thumb. Coordinates. Fresh silence swallowed the harbor again. Emily stared at the numbers etched into the metal. What are those? Ryan's face had gone pale beneath the dim pier lights. Not coordinates from Afghanistan. He looked slowly toward Marcus. These are from the United States. The coordinates engraved into the back of the locator beacon seemed impossible beneath the dim harbor lights. Rainwater slid slowly across the scratched metal, while Ryan Vale stared at the numbers as though they had reached up from the grave itself. Norfolk Harbor had grown nearly silent now except for distant thunder and the slow, restless churn of black Atlantic water beneath the pier. Ghost remained beside Ryan, unmoving, his amber eyes fixed on the beacon with complete certainty. Emily Carter stepped closer carefully. What do those coordinates mean? Ryan swallowed once before answering. They point somewhere inland. Marcus Holloway looked uneasy immediately. Ryan. But the commander was already pulling his phone from inside his soaked uniform jacket. His fingers moved quickly across the screen while cold mist drifted around them beneath the memorial lights. Lily crouched beside Ghost again, wrapping both arms gently around the old German shepherd's neck. He knew there was something there, she whispered softly. Ghost leaned against her shoulder without taking his eyes off Ryan. After several seconds, the commander stopped moving completely. His expression changed first. Then the color slowly drained from his face. Emily noticed instantly. What is it? Ryan looked up slowly from the phone screen. The coordinates lead to Western Virginia. Marcus cursed quietly beneath his breath. Emily frowned in confusion. Virginia. Ryan nodded once. Blue Ridge Mountains. The harbor wind whipped harder across the pier, rattling the memorial flags overhead while fog rolled thicker around the destroyer docked beside them. Ryan stared back down at the coordinates again. There is an old decommissioned communication station near those coordinates. Marcus immediately stepped forward. No. Ryan looked toward him sharply. You know the place. Marcus hesitated too long. Emily felt her chest tighten immediately. Marcus. The older SEAL rubbed one hand slowly across his beard, exhaustion carved deep into every line of his weathered face. The station was used for intelligence debriefings after overseas recovery operations. Emily stared at him. Recovery operations? Marcus nodded faintly. Sometimes survivors came back in bad condition. Physically, mentally. The military kept certain locations off record for security reasons. Ryan's eyes narrowed. That station closed 6 years ago. Marcus looked away toward the ocean. Officially, silence settled heavily across the pier once more. Even the thunder seemed farther away now beneath the unbearable weight of possibility hanging between them. Emily looked down at the coordinates etched into the beacon again. You think Daniel was there? Ryan answered honestly. I do not know what to think anymore. Ghost suddenly stood and walked directly toward the memorial wall again. Slowly, deliberately, he stopped beneath Daniel Carter's engraved name before turning back toward Ryan and releasing one sharp bark. The sound echoed through the fog-covered harbor like a gunshot in church silence. Every seal froze instantly. Ryan stared at the dog. Ghost barked again. Then he began pacing in small, tight circles beside the wall, restless now for the first time all evening. Lily frowned softly. He only does that when he wants someone to follow him. Ryan's heartbeat visibly shifted beneath his expression. Where did Ghost live after he came home? Emily looked confused by the sudden question. Mostly with us. Ryan stepped closer. Mostly. Emily nodded slowly. After the military released him, Ghost disappeared a lot during the first year. Marcus looked up sharply. Disappeared where? Emily shook her head. We never knew. Sometimes he vanished for 2 or 3 days at a time. Ryan stared at Ghost now with growing realization. Dogs returned to familiar routes. Marcus immediately understood too. Ryan. But Ryan was already thinking faster now, years of buried instincts waking beneath the storm. How old was Lily when Ghost stopped disappearing? Emily looked toward her daughter carefully. About 3. Ryan inhaled sharply. That is around the same time the station officially shut down. Nobody spoke after that. The fog drifting across the harbor suddenly felt colder somehow. Heavier. Ghost returned quietly to Ryan's side and pressed against his leg once more. Not anxious. Certain. Like a guide dog trying to lead blind people towards something they still could not see. Emily looked between them all, her voice barely above a whisper now. You think Ghost was trying to go back to Daniel? Ryan answered slowly. I think Ghost never believed Daniel was dead. Lily brushed trembling fingers through the fur behind Ghost's ears. Neither did Ghost's heart. The innocence in her voice nearly broke something inside Ryan completely. He turned away toward the ocean briefly, jaw clenched hard against emotion. Marcus stepped beside him quietly. If there is even a chance Mercer knew something, Ryan cut him off softly. Then he buried an American soldier alive on paper. Marcus lowered his eyes. The younger SEALs standing farther back exchanged silent, uneasy looks. One finally spoke for the first time in nearly an hour. Lieutenant Owen Hayes, youngest among them, barely 30. Mercer retired last winter, he said carefully. Ryan looked toward him instantly. Where? Owen hesitated. Near Roanoke. Marcus muttered something under his breath. Ryan's eyes hardened immediately. Close to the station. The rain had almost fully stopped now, leaving only drifting mist and the smell of wet salt water hanging over the harbor. Emily stared down at Daniel's photograph, still trembling faintly in her hands. If somebody knew he survived, her voice cracked painfully. Why would they hide him? Nobody answered right away because none of them wanted to say the truth aloud. Military mistakes were buried every day beneath paperwork and silence. But soldiers were not supposed to be among the things buried. Ghost suddenly turned sharply toward the harbor entrance. His ears rose high. His body stiffened instantly beneath the dim lights. Ryan noticed first. What is it? Ghost stared into the fog without blinking. Then slowly, quietly, the old German shepherd began whining deep in his throat. Not fear. Recognition. Everyone turned toward the fog-covered dock entrance just as headlights appeared through the mist. A black government SUV rolled silently onto the pier and stopped near the memorial tents. The engine shut off. Nobody stepped out immediately. Ryan's expression darkened. Marcus whispered softly beneath his breath. Oh no. The driver's side door finally opened. A tall older man stepped slowly into the harbor mist wearing a dark overcoat despite the rain. Silver hair. Cold posture. Familiar eyes sharpened by years inside military intelligence rooms where truth was treated like classified ammunition. Ghost released a low growl the moment he saw him. Ryan's voice turned flat as steel. Grant Mercer. Grant Mercer stepped through the harbor fog with the slow, controlled posture of a man accustomed to entering rooms where nobody truly wanted him present. The black government SUV remained idling behind him beside the wet pier while mist curled around the headlights in pale ribbons. He looked older than Ryan Vale remembered. Mid-60s now. tall but thinner, silver hair combed neatly despite the weather, dark overcoat untouched by panic. But his eyes remained exactly the same. Cold, careful, the kind of eyes trained to measure people before speaking to them. Ghost immediately moved in front of Lily the moment Mercer approached. The old German shepherd's growl deepened low in his chest, while every muscle beneath his sable coat tightened with unmistakable warning. Mercer stopped several feet away from the group and looked directly at the dog first. Not the memorial wall. Not Ryan. The dog. I was told Ghost died years ago, he said calmly. Ryan's expression hardened instantly. Funny, he answered quietly. We were told a lot of things. Rainwater dripped steadily from the edge of the memorial wall, while the Atlantic wind swept fog across the harbor in slow waves. Marcus Holloway stepped forward slightly beside Ryan, shoulders tense beneath his soaked uniform. Why are you here, Mercer? The older man glanced briefly toward the open equipment case and the combat vest lying inside. Then his eyes settled on the locator beacon still resting in Ryan's hand. Something unreadable flickered across his face for half a second before disappearing again behind practiced control. I came because military property was flagged during archival transfer tonight, Mercer said evenly. Ryan almost laughed. The sound carried no humor at all. Military property. Mercer looked toward Emily Carter then. For the first time, his expression softened slightly. Mrs. Carter. Emily stared at him with open distrust. You signed my husband's death papers. Mercer held her gaze quietly. Yes. Ghost growled louder immediately. Lily tightened both hands around his collar gently. Easy, she whispered softly, though her own voice trembled now beneath the harbor wind. Ryan stepped between Mercer and the Carter family without even thinking about it. The coordinates, he said flatly. Why are they engraved into Daniel's locator beacon? Mercer remained silent for several long seconds. Thunder rolled faintly over the Atlantic again, while mist drifted through the memorial lights behind them. Finally, Mercer answered carefully. Those coordinates were not supposed to exist. Marcus muttered under his breath. Jesus Christ. Ryan's eyes sharpened instantly. Meaning what? Mercer looked toward the memorial wall where Daniel Carter's engraved name shimmered beneath rainwater and dim light. Meaning Lieutenant Carter was never officially processed through standard casualty channels. Emily stared at him. What does that even mean? Mercer inhaled slowly through his nose. It means your husband survived longer than command publicly acknowledged. The harbor seemed to freeze around them after that sentence. Even the wind felt still for one impossible moment. Emily's breath hitched visibly, while Lily looked between the adults with frightened confusion growing in her small face. Ryan stepped closer toward Mercer now, voice dangerously quiet. How long? Mercer did not answer immediately. Ghost's growl deepened again. The old dog stared at Mercer with complete hostility now, ears pinned back beneath the cold mist. Mercer noticed it. He remembers me, he murmured softly. Ryan's jaw tightened hard. Enough to show beneath the harbor lights. Should he? Mercer looked at Ghost for several long seconds before finally speaking. I met Daniel Carter after extraction. Emily's knees nearly buckled beneath her. Ryan stared at Mercer in absolute disbelief. Marcus closed his eyes briefly like a man hearing confirmation of his worst fear. No, Ryan whispered. Mercer nodded once. The rescue team found him 6 days after the storm near the eastern mountain ridge. Severe dehydration. Exposure. Temporary memory trauma. Emily covered her mouth with trembling fingers while tears streamed down her face beneath the mist. You found him alive. Mercer's voice remained calm, but quieter now. Yes. Ryan's control finally cracked. Then why the hell did you bury him? The words echoed sharply across the nearly empty pier. Ghost barked once beside Lily, the sound exploding through the harbor silence. Mercer remained motionless despite Ryan's anger. Because Daniel Carter requested it. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Emily stared at Mercer like she had stopped understanding language itself. That is not possible. Mercer slowly removed a weathered leather folder from inside his coat. Rain dotted its surface while the old man carefully opened it beneath the memorial lights. Your husband regained consciousness at the Virginia station 14 days after recovery. Ryan's face had gone pale. The station? Mercer nodded. Daniel suffered partial neurological damage from prolonged exposure and severe stress. Intelligence doctors feared hostile tracking risk after the operation. Emily shook her head violently through tears. No, no, he would have come home. Mercer looked directly at her then, and for the first time something almost human appeared beneath the cold discipline in his eyes. Regret. He tried. Ryan stepped closer instantly. What happened? Mercer stared silently toward Ghost before answering. Daniel's memory returned slowly over several weeks. Some days he remembered everything. Other days almost nothing. Lily whispered softly, "Daddy forgot us." Mercer's face tightened faintly. No, he looked at her carefully. You were the one thing he never forgot. Emily broke completely then, tears shaking through her body beneath the cold harbor fog. Ghost immediately moved beside her and pressed against her legs protectively. Mercer continued quietly. The problem was not memory. Ryan's voice turned hard again. Then what? Mercer lowered his eyes briefly toward the wet concrete beneath them. Daniel discovered classified information during the convoy evacuation. Marcus stared at him. What kind of information? Mercer answered slowly. Human trafficking routes operating through refugee corridors along the border. Ryan's expression darkened instantly. Mercer continued. The network involved foreign contractors connected to multiple intelligence operations. Emily looked horrified. And Daniel found out. Mercer nodded once. After recovery, Command feared any public reappearance would place him and his family in immediate danger. Ryan's fists clenched visibly at his sides. So your solution was to erase him. Mercer looked exhausted suddenly. Much older than before. My solution was to keep him breathing. Ghost suddenly stepped away from Emily and moved directly toward Mercer. The old German shepherd stopped inches from him, while every seal on the pier went completely still. Mercer slowly looked down at the dog. Ghost stared back with deep, unbearable recognition. Then, quietly, heartbreakingly, the dog rested his head against Mercer's knee. Mercer's composure shattered for the first time all night. His voice barely held together when he finally whispered. He waited by Daniel's room every single morning. The fog along Norfolk Harbor drifted slowly between the memorial lights after Grant Mercer's confession, turning the pier into something dreamlike and unreal. Ghost remained pressed against Mercer's knee, the old German shepherd completely still now except for the faint trembling in his aging body. Nobody spoke for several long seconds. Emily Carter stared at the intelligence officer with hollow disbelief, while rainwater clung to her eyelashes like tears that no longer knew where grief ended and hope began. Ryan Vale stood frozen beside the memorial wall, jaw tight, fists clenched hard at his sides. You kept him hidden, he said quietly. Mercer lowered his eyes toward Ghost. I kept him alive. Ryan's voice sharpened instantly. Away from his family. The older man inhaled slowly through his nose. Daniel agreed to the arrangement after full briefing. Emily shook her head violently. No, her voice cracked beneath the cold harbor wind. Daniel would never abandon Lily. Mercer looked toward her carefully. He did not abandon her. His words came softer now. Human. He believed staying away was protecting her. Lily stood silently beside Ghost, her small face pale beneath the dim pier lights. Daddy was alive all this time. Mercer's expression finally broke around the edges. For a while, the Atlantic water churned dark beneath the pier while thunder rolled far offshore. Ryan stepped forward immediately. What does that mean? Mercer hesitated. The silence alone was enough to make Emily's knees weaken again. Ghost slowly lifted his head from Mercer's knee and stared up at him with deep, searching eyes. Like the dog already knew the answer and simply wanted the human to say it out loud. Mercer looked down at Ghost before speaking. Daniel lived at the Virginia station under restricted protection for 11 months after recovery. Emily covered her mouth instantly. Ryan closed his eyes briefly as pain passed visibly across his face. 11 months. Nearly a year stolen from the people standing here. He underwent medical treatment and debriefing. Mercer continued quietly. Most days he cooperated. Some days he tried to leave. Ryan's eyes snapped open. Tried. Mercer nodded once. Repeatedly. A faint sad smile touched Ghost's muzzle for half a second at that. Lily noticed immediately. Daddy wanted to come home. Mercer looked at her softly. Every day. The fog drifting through the harbor lights thickened around them, while distant ship horns echoed mournfully across the Atlantic. Emily stared at Mercer with tears rolling freely down her cheeks. Then why did he not? Mercer slowly reached inside his coat again and removed another object wrapped carefully in faded cloth. Ryan stiffened immediately. Mercer unfolded the fabric with slow, deliberate movements beneath the dim light. Inside rested an old cassette tape recorder. Scratched, worn, ancient compared to modern military equipment, but preserved carefully all the same. Ryan's face went pale instantly. "No," he whispered. Mercer looked toward him quietly. "He made this 3 weeks before he disappeared." Emily's breathing became shallow. "Disappeared?" Mercer nodded once. "Daniel left the station voluntarily." Ryan stepped closer immediately. "Without authorization?" Mercer answered honestly. "Without warning." Ghost stood abruptly beside Lily the moment Mercer spoke those words. His ears rose high beneath the harbor mist while his tail gave one slow, uncertain movement for the first time all night. "Hope." Ryan stared at the recorder. "You never told anybody." Mercer's eyes hardened slightly again beneath the emotion. "By the time we discovered he was gone, the people hunting him already knew where he had been." Emily looked terrified now. "Hunting him?" Mercer nodded grimly. "Daniel carried names, routes, faces connected to trafficking operations hidden inside humanitarian corridors overseas." Ryan muttered under his breath, "Jesus." Mercer continued quietly. "Those networks reached farther than military command wanted publicly acknowledged." The harbor fell silent again beneath the weight of those words. Ghost stepped closer toward the recorder now, nose twitching faintly against the damp air. Mercer noticed immediately. "He recognizes it." Ryan looked confused. "How?" Mercer gave a tired, faint smile. "Daniel played music for Ghost every morning during recovery therapy." Lily's eyes widened softly. "Daddy sang to him." Mercer nodded once. Terribly. For the first time all evening, the faintest breath of warmth passed through the group. Brief, fragile, gone almost instantly. Mercer slowly handed the recorder toward Emily. Her trembling fingers barely managed to take it. "What is on this?" Mercer looked toward the dark Atlantic horizon before answering. "A message." Emily stared at the recorder like it might explode in her hands. "For us." Mercer swallowed once. "For Lily." The old tape recorder looked impossibly small against Emily's trembling palms. Rainwater slid down. It scratched plastic surface while Ghost sat quietly at her feet watching it with complete focus. Ryan stepped beside her carefully. "Does it still work?" Mercer nodded faintly. "Battery was replaced every year." Marcus Holloway stared at him in disbelief. "You kept this all these years?" Mercer looked older suddenly, weary in ways no uniform could hide. "Some promises survive longer than governments do." Emily slowly pressed the playback button with shaking fingers. Static crackled softly through the harbor air. Wind noise. Faint interference. Then silence. Lily held her breath. Ghost's ears lifted sharply. And finally a voice emerged through the crackling tape. Weak. Tired. But unmistakably alive. "Daniel Carter." "Hey, Bug," he said softly through static. Lily instantly burst into tears at the sound. Emily nearly collapsed beside Ryan. Ghost stood immediately, whining deep in his chest while his tail trembled faintly behind him. Daniel's voice continued through the old recorder. "If you are hearing this, it means Ghost finally found his way back to you." Ryan covered his mouth with one hand as emotion broke visibly across his face. Daniel coughed softly on the tape before continuing. "I do not know when I can come home yet. Maybe soon. Maybe not for a while." Static crackled harder through the recording. "But I need you to know something, Lily." His voice weakened slightly. "None of this was because I stopped loving you." Ghost pressed against Emily's legs, trembling violently now. Daniel's voice softened further through the tape recorder. "Every night I tell Ghost about your laugh, so he does not forget it." Emily sobbed openly beneath the harbor lights. Ryan stared toward the dark water, unable to hide tears anymore. Then the tape crackled sharply again before Daniel whispered one final sentence. "If Ghost ever starts looking for me again, follow him." The tape recorder fell silent beneath the harbor fog, but Daniel Carter's voice seemed to linger in the cold Atlantic air long after the static faded away. Nobody on the pier moved. Emily Carter stood trembling beside the memorial wall while tears streamed freely down her face. The old cassette recorder clutched tightly against her chest like something alive. Lily buried her face against Ghost's neck, crying softly into the old German shepherd's wet fur while the dog remained perfectly still beside her, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the harbor lights. Ryan Vale stared toward the dark water without blinking. His jaw remained tight, but tears had already broken free beneath the rain and mist together. Grant Mercer quietly removed his glasses and rubbed a tired hand across his eyes. Even Marcus Holloway looked shaken now, the weight of 8 buried years finally pressing fully into the open air between them all. Ghost suddenly lifted his head. Slowly, deliberately. His ears twitched toward the black SUV parked near the edge of the pier. Ryan noticed immediately. What is it? The old dog stood without hesitation and began walking toward the vehicle through drifting fog. Not hurried. Certain. Lily looked up quickly. Ghost. But the German shepherd kept moving. Ryan followed instantly. So did Marcus and Mercer. Emily grabbed Lily's hand and hurried behind them through the wet harbor mist while the memorial lights flickered faintly against puddles scattered across the concrete. Ghost stopped beside the rear passenger side of the SUV and stared directly through the dark tinted window. Then he released one low sharp bark. Mercer's face changed immediately. No, he whispered under his breath. Ryan looked toward him sharply. What? Ghost barked again. Harder this time. Then he scratched once against the SUV door with his paw. Ryan's pulse visibly quickened. Open it. Mercer hesitated. Marcus stepped forward immediately. Mercer. The older man looked genuinely unsettled now for the first time all night. There is nothing inside. Ghost growled. Ryan moved closer toward the SUV. Then opened the damn door. The harbor wind carried the scent of wet salt water and diesel fuel across the pier, while thunder rolled faintly over the Atlantic horizon. Mercer slowly reached into his coat pocket and removed the key fob. His fingers trembled slightly. Emily noticed it immediately. So did Ryan. The locks clicked softly through the fog. Ghost stepped backward once the door unlocked, staring intensely at the rear passenger compartment. Ryan slowly pulled the door open. The inside of the SUV looked empty at first glance. Dark leather seats. Government files stacked neatly beside a travel bag. The faint smell of old coffee and rain lingering in the cold air. Then Ghost jumped into the vehicle. The movement startled everyone. The old dog had looked exhausted moments ago beside the memorial wall, but now he moved with sudden, desperate energy, nose working frantically against the seats and floor mats. Lily stepped closer anxiously. Ghost. Ryan leaned partially into the SUV while Ghost pushed his nose beneath the rear seat. Then suddenly the dog froze. Completely still. One sharp whine escaped his throat. Ryan crouched lower immediately. What did you find? Ghost pawed hard against the underside of the seat. Once. Twice. Ryan reached underneath carefully. His fingers touched something metallic hidden deep beneath the frame. He slowly pulled it free into the dim harbor light. A stainless steel thermos. Scratched. Old. Wrapped near the lid with faded green tape. Ryan stared at it in silence. Emily's breath caught violently beside him. That thermos. Her voice shook apart. I gave that to Daniel before deployment. Mercer closed his eyes. Ryan looked up sharply. Why is this in your car? Nobody answered immediately. Ghost stared directly at Mercer now, breathing heavily while rainwater dripped from his fur onto the SUV floor. Marcus took one slow step backward. Mercer. The older man looked suddenly ancient beneath the harbor fog. Daniel left it behind. Emily stepped closer, trembling uncontrollably now. Where? Mercer swallowed hard. At the station. Ryan unscrewed the thermos lid slowly beneath the memorial lights. Inside rested folded papers protected carefully within sealed plastic wrapping. His hands visibly tightened. Jesus Christ. Emily stared at him. What is it? Ryan carefully removed the papers one by one. Handwritten notes. Maps. Names. Dates. And beneath them all rested a faded Polaroid photograph. Ryan looked at it and went completely still. Marcus leaned closer over his shoulder and inhaled sharply. Emily reached toward the photograph with shaking fingers. It showed Daniel Carter. Older. Thinner. Beard grown out. Standing beside a mountain cabin somewhere deep in forested hills. Snow covered the ground around him while Ghost stood at his side exactly as he did now. On the back of the photograph, written carefully in Daniel's handwriting, were 6 words. Still waiting for the right time. Emily broke completely. A sob escaped her chest so violently she nearly collapsed against the SUV door. Lily looked confused and frightened beside her. Mom. Ryan stared at the photograph like he no longer trusted reality itself. When was this taken? Mercer answered quietly. 4 years ago. Silence crashed across the harbor. Even the ocean beneath the pier seemed to stop moving for one impossible moment. Ryan looked up slowly, eyes burning now with disbelief and fury alike. 4 years ago? Mercer nodded once. Daniel contacted me twice after leaving the station. Emily whispered through tears. He was alive 4 years ago. Mercer lowered his eyes. Yes. Ryan stepped forward instantly. Then where is he now? Ghost suddenly barked loudly again before anyone could answer. The old German shepherd jumped down from the SUV and turned toward the harbor exit road. His ears rose high, his entire body trembling now with sudden alertness. Ryan looked toward him immediately. Ghost. The dog barked again, then began pulling hard toward the road leading away from the pier. Lily tightened her grip on the leash, but Ghost kept straining forward, whining desperately into the fog-covered night. Mercer stared at the dog with visible fear creeping into his expression for the first time. No, he whispered. Ryan looked sharply toward him. What? Mercer swallowed once. That is exactly what Ghost did the last night Daniel disappeared. Ghost pulled hard against the leash toward the harbor exit road, his old body trembling with desperate urgency beneath the drifting fog. The memorial pier behind them had fallen almost completely silent now except for distant ship horns and the restless Atlantic water slamming softly against steel pilings below. Ryan Vale moved first. Instinct. Training. He stepped after the German shepherd immediately, while Marcus Holloway and the younger SEALs followed close behind. Emily Carter grabbed Lily tightly with one arm, while still clutching Daniel's photograph against her chest. Ryan, she called shakily. Where is he going? Ryan never took his eyes off the dog. Somewhere he remembers. Grant Mercer stood motionless beside the black SUV for half a second longer, staring toward Ghost with something dangerously close to fear behind his tired eyes. Then he followed too. Ghost reached the edge of the pier access road and stopped suddenly beneath a flickering streetlight. Fog drifted around him in pale ribbons while his ears twitched sharply toward the dark parking lot beyond the harbor gates. Ryan slowed beside him carefully. Easy boy. Ghost lowered his nose toward the wet pavement and inhaled deeply. Once. Twice. Then the old German shepherd released a low whining sound deep in his throat and turned sharply toward an older section of the harbor parking area lined with maintenance garages and storage containers. Marcus frowned. There is nothing back there except abandoned service buildings. Mercer looked pale suddenly. Not abandoned. Ryan turned toward him immediately. What? Mercer hesitated only briefly this time. One of the old naval communication warehouses was converted into temporary intelligence storage after the Virginia station shut down. Ryan's expression darkened instantly. Storage for what? Mercer answered quietly. Unprocessed archives. Safe house records. Recovery files. Emily's chest tightened painfully. Daniel's files. Mercer did not answer directly, but the silence itself was enough. Ghost barked sharply and began moving again through the fog-covered lot. The group followed quickly now beneath dim security lights humming softly overhead. The farther they walked from the memorial pier, the quieter the harbor became. No crowds. No ceremony. Only mist, cold air, and the sound of their footsteps against rain-dark pavement. Ghost suddenly slowed near the far end of the lot beside a rusted chain-link fence covered in salt stains from years of Atlantic storms. Beyond it stood a long concrete warehouse building, with dark windows and faded military markings barely visible beneath peeling paint. One security light flickered weakly near the entrance. Ghost stopped completely. His breathing changed instantly. Faster now. Ryan crouched beside him carefully. What is it? The old German shepherd stared toward the warehouse door without blinking. Then he released a soft, heartbreaking whine Ryan had only heard from military dogs standing outside field hospitals, waiting for soldiers who never came back out. Mercer stared at the building with visible dread. No, he whispered softly. Ryan stood immediately. You know this place. Mercer nodded once. Daniel stayed here twice after leaving Virginia. Emily's knees weakened again. He was here. Mercer looked toward the warehouse. The last confirmed sighting. Ghost suddenly pulled forward hard enough that Lily nearly lost the leash. Ghost! But the old dog was already moving quickly toward the warehouse entrance, nails scraping sharply against wet pavement beneath the fog. Ryan hurried after him while Marcus radioed quietly to the younger SEALs behind them. The warehouse door stood partially rusted open by several inches. Darkness waited beyond it. Ghost reached the entrance first and stopped abruptly. His ears rose high. Every muscle in his body locked tight beneath his soaked sable coat. Ryan slowly pushed the heavy metal door wider. The hinges groaned loudly through the silence. Cold, stale air drifted out from inside, carrying the smell of dust, machine oil, and something older underneath it all. Human presence long abandoned, but never fully gone. Flashlights clicked on around the group, beams cutting through the darkness in pale cones. Rows of covered crates stretched through the warehouse interior, while old military filing cabinets lined the far wall beneath, hanging industrial lights that no longer worked. Water dripped steadily somewhere deeper inside the building. Ghost stepped carefully across the concrete floor, nose low now, moving with intense focus despite his age. Ryan followed close behind him while Emily and Lily stayed near Mercer and Marcus at the entrance. "This place feels wrong," Lily whispered softly. Ghost stopped near an old desk covered in dust and scattered paperwork. Then suddenly he barked once and turned sharply toward a narrow hallway disappearing deeper into the warehouse shadows. Ryan's flashlight followed immediately. There, the group moved carefully down the hallway, while distant thunder rolled faintly outside beyond the metal walls. At the end of the corridor stood a small office door. Closed. Ghost reached it and froze completely. Ryan slowly approached beside him. "Ghost." The dog pressed his nose against the bottom of the door and inhaled deeply. Then his entire body began trembling. Not fear. Recognition. Ryan looked toward Mercer carefully. When was the last time anyone entered this room? Mercer's voice sounded almost hollow now. "For years ago." Ryan slowly reached for the door handle. It turned immediately. Unlocked. The office inside was small and dim beneath the flashlight beams. Dust coated everything. Filing boxes stacked against one wall. An old cot near the corner. Medical supplies long expired resting beside a sink, stained by time and rust. But none of that mattered, because directly above the cot hung a photograph taped carefully against the wall. Lily gasped softly the moment the flashlight illuminated it. The photograph showed her, maybe 4 years old, sitting beside Ghost on a front porch swing at sunset. Emily covered her mouth instantly with trembling fingers. "Oh my God." Ghost walked slowly toward the cot now, whining softly beneath his breath. Then he climbed carefully onto the dusty mattress and lay down exactly in the center. Ryan swept his flashlight slowly across the room again until the beam stopped near the edge of the cot. A fresh coffee mug rested there. Steam no longer rose from it. But one faint detail remained unmistakable beneath the dim flashlight glow. Warmth still clung faintly to the ceramic surface. Ryan touched it once and immediately looked up toward the others, every instinct inside him sharpening at once. Somebody was here tonight. The warmth on the coffee mug vanished almost instantly beneath the cold warehouse air, but Ryan Vale's words still struck through the room like thunder. Somebody was here. Tonight. Nobody moved. The flashlight beams trembled faintly across the dust-covered walls while the distant Atlantic storm rumbled outside beyond layers of concrete and rusted steel. Ghost remained lying on the old cot, his amber eyes fixed toward the dark hallway beyond the office door. Not frightened. Waiting. Emily Carter stepped slowly farther into the room, staring at the photograph taped above the cot. Her daughter smiling beside Ghost on the porch swing years earlier. A life frozen in time. A family watched from a distance by a man who had loved them enough to disappear. Tears slipped silently down her face again. "He lived here," she whispered. Mercer nodded faintly behind her. Off and on. Ryan swept his flashlight slowly across the office again. A worn military jacket hung behind the door. Several paperback novels sat stacked beside the cot. One old battery-powered radio rested near the sink. None of it looked temporary. It looked lived in. Human. Ghost suddenly stood on the cot and turned sharply toward the hallway. His ears rose instantly. Every muscle beneath his sable fur tightened with sudden alertness. Ryan reacted immediately. "Did you hear that?" Marcus nodded once. Very faint. Footsteps somewhere deeper in the warehouse. Slow. Uneven. Then silence again. Lily gripped Emily's hand tightly. "Mom." Ryan moved carefully into the hallway, flashlight beam cutting through drifting dust particles in the stale air. Marcus and the younger SEALs followed close behind, while Mercer remained frozen near the office doorway, pale beneath the harsh flashlight glow. Ghost jumped down from the cot and moved ahead of them all. Not rushing, guiding. The footsteps came again. Soft. Somewhere near the rear loading area deeper inside the warehouse. Ryan's voice lowered instinctively into command calm. Easy. Nobody spread out. The group advanced slowly through the dark corridor while thunder rolled louder outside. Water dripped steadily from old pipes overhead, echoing through the warehouse like distant ticking clocks. Ghost suddenly stopped near a final metal security door at the end of the corridor. His breathing quickened. Then came the sound again. A cough. Weak. Human. Emily covered her mouth instantly. Ryan reached the door first and carefully pushed it open. Cold night air rushed into the hallway from the loading dock beyond. The large rear bay door stood partially open several feet ahead, allowing harbor fog to drift slowly inside across the concrete floor. A single lantern glowed dimly near stacked crates beside the wall, and sitting there beneath an old wool blanket was a man. Thin now. Older. Dark beard streaked with gray. A faded military jacket hanging loosely from shoulders that once carried armor and duty with equal strength. His hands trembled slightly around a steaming cup of coffee while tired blue eyes lifted slowly toward the flashlight beams. Ghost made the sound before anyone else moved. A deep, aching whine that seemed to rise from 8 lost years buried inside the old dog's chest. Then the German shepherd ran. Faster than his age should have allowed. Faster than grief. Ghost crossed the warehouse floor and reached the man beside the crates just as the coffee cup slipped from trembling hands onto the concrete below. Ghost, the man whispered brokenly. The old dog leaped against him instantly, whining, crying, trembling so violently his legs nearly gave out beneath him. The man wrapped both arms around the German shepherd and buried his face against the wet sable fur. Ryan stopped walking completely. Marcus froze beside him. Emily could not breathe. Because the impossible thing sitting beneath the lantern light was Daniel Carter. Alive. Daniel slowly looked up over Ghost's shoulder then. Time had carved itself deeply into him. Scars along one side of his face. Exhaustion buried behind his eyes. But the moment his gaze found Emily and Lily standing frozen beneath the warehouse lights, something inside him shattered completely. Emily, he whispered. Her knees nearly collapsed beneath her. Lily stared silently at the man before her. Too young to fully understand how grief worked, but old enough to recognize love when she saw it. Daniel's eyes filled instantly the moment he looked at her. Bug. Emily finally moved. She crossed the warehouse floor like someone walking through a dream she was. Terrified would disappear if she moved too fast. Tears streamed freely down her face, while Daniel slowly rose unsteadily to his feet beside Ghost. I am sorry, he whispered before she even reached him. God, Emily, I tried. She hit his chest sobbing before he could say another word. Daniel wrapped his arms around her carefully, trembling almost as hard as Ghost beneath the lantern glow. Ryan looked away toward the loading dock entrance, jaw tight as emotion finally overwhelmed years of buried guilt. Marcus wiped both hands slowly across his face. Even Mercer stood motionless beneath the warehouse shadows, unable to speak. Lily remained frozen several feet away, while Ghost moved back toward her gently. The old German shepherd pressed against her legs and looked up at her with soft amber eyes, as if saying the final step belonged to her now. Daniel slowly lifted his gaze toward his daughter. Tears ran openly through his beard now. Lily. She stared at him uncertainly. You came back. Daniel nodded once through shaking breath. I never stopped trying. The little girl crossed the warehouse floor slowly at first. Then faster. Daniel dropped to his knees just as she threw her arms around his neck. The sound that escaped him then did not sound like a soldier. It sounded like a man finally allowed to come home. Ghost circled beside them whining softly, tail wagging through tears and fog and years of waiting. Ryan watched silently from across the loading dock while rain began falling lightly outside again beyond the open warehouse door. Daniel eventually looked up toward him through tears and exhaustion alike. Their eyes met across the room. Neither man spoke for several long seconds. Then Daniel gave the faintest nod. Ryan returned it immediately. Nothing else needed saying. Some wounds could not be explained, only carried. The lantern flickered softly against the warehouse walls while the Atlantic storm rolled beyond the harbor outside. Ghost finally settled beside Lily and Daniel together on the concrete floor, resting his graying muzzle gently across both their laps. Peace. Quiet. learn the hard way. And for the first time in 8 years, the old German shepherd closed his eyes without waiting for someone to come back.